Peace, everybody. I'm doing this video today because I was watching Tariq Nasheed last night, and he mentioned uh, Cynthia G, Synthetic G, and how she stooped extremely low and had Zaddy on her show to discuss the plight of the black man. Not necessarily the plight of the black man from a positive perspective, but to denigrate and to downgrade the so-called black man, to criticize and to diss the so-called black man in the presence of the active enemy. And Synthetic G, her accordingly, Synthetic G doesn't really realize that our position in America, even her, was inherited. We inherited oppression. We inherited a position of weakness in this world. We was born into oppression, and the so-called Zaddy, the so-called Caucasian, was born into privilege. And this had nothing to do with any of us. This had to do with something that happened in the past, a vague past that we really don't completely understand. We don't know if we were actually the kingdom in America who somehow lost our power. We don't know if we were actually betrayed by our own people. We don't know what happened that led to this position. We have bits and pieces of it, but Synthetic G, for some reason, blames the so-called black man for this position and says that the so-called black man is doing nothing whatsoever to get out this position. She claims that the so-called black man doesn't protect the black woman. But Synthetic G, ask yourself one question. Who are we supposed to protect you against? To say that we are in a position of weakness and we are dominated, that must also insinuate that there is a person who is actually causing the domination. Who is that person? Is it a ghost? Or is it the Zaddy that you sitting there next to? The Zaddy that you're in alignment with, your ally. Now you can look at it from two perspectives. You're probably a fool. You know not what you do, or you are a collaborator, a traitor, working against your people. Like in the movie 12 Years a Slave, one of the so-called black women was married to the slave owner. She was a partaker and an owner of black people. And you look at the Willie Lynch letter saying that the biggest tool of white supremacy is the so-called black woman, because she could teach her children to be slaves from a child up, train them and make them comfortable, condition them to serve the so-called slave master until they die. The black woman was a tool, a very crucial tool to upholding white supremacy. So that could actually be what Cynthia G is trying to do. She could see that there's an actual movement of so-called black men rising up independently, doing for self, without necessarily needing a backbone. Like when Martin Luther King had Coretta Scott King, it always been traditional that the so-called black woman was always the backbone of the situation that held things together, while the man went out there and did the work. He always had a house with a good meal on the table when he came back. Now we don't have that. So we're actually adapting to not having a so-called black woman as a, what do you call it, partner, I would say. That's a simple word. So we're actually adapting, moving on from that and still getting things done. So I think so-called white supremacy is trying to sabotage the so-called black man's attention, because how can you be the so-called choice of the black woman? I'm talking to Zaddy. How can you be the so-called black woman's first option and you're on her show talking about me? A man is sitting there talking about another man with a woman. That means that she's really interested in the man that she's talking about. She's using you as a pawn to get that person's attention, to make that person jealous. You're just a tool. And you're in a weak man, or a beta male they call them. They're cool with this position because they saying at least I'm in her presence. And if she get tired of talking about you, she's eventually going to look at me and I'm going to end up winning anyway. This is what the weak man does. He sits there and discuss another man with a woman and walk around to make him jealous, knowing that he's sitting around to make him jealous, because he said eventually he's going to be the winner. you know. But that's a weak man. That's not a strong man. That's not an alpha male, you know. And Synthetic G is really crying out to the so-called black man without having the dignity and the without having the she's not humble. She's not humble enough to just admit that she can't do nothing by herself. She's crying about the black man every day, even though he's not on her mind. If you and Zaddy are good, why don't y'all talk about y'all plans for the future and what y'all are building, what y'all are doing? Why are you talking about the black man? What you talking about the black man for? Talk to Zaddy about y'all vacations, raise your families and all of that. You you just embarrassing yourself. You had Zaddy on your show, and the object of your show was another man. Won't you talk about Zaddy, what he's doing, his position? Because see, the so-called white man didn't earn this position. It was inherited, just like our position was inherited. But when you're born into this world, you have a clean slate, and your own efforts and your own merit can rise you up into a higher position. And that's what they fear, because the so-called white man who inherited this position, they can't re-inherit it without going through extreme turmoil and struggle. And they say we might never get that back again. So they want to hold on to this position as long as possible. And they want to take credit for this position. You can't take credit for what your ancestors did. You can only take credit for what you do in your situation, how you pull yourself out of this situation. And time again, the so-called black man have pulled his people out of this situation, be it with wars, be it with struggle, be it whatever. It was always the black man that pulled the black people out of the situation. And tell me the Caucasian male that pulled anybody out of situation. People come to America and they give the credit of this freedom to the white man. But the white man wanted you to be a slave. They didn't want no immigrants to come here. They had the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Indian Removal Act, which the Congress actually passed laws, signed laws to remove the Native Americans out of their land. The Supreme Court upheld slavery for decades, even to this very day. The so-called white man done nothing to cause freedom here. Nothing. All the freedom that you enjoy came by way of a black man. All of it, even women's liberation, the immigrants who come here. And I talked about earlier, how did the black man get in this position, right? And according to what they teach us in black history, the African actually collaborated with the Arab and the Caucasian against us in particular. And we lived in the Mali Empire in West Africa, which extended to Asia Minor and also into the Americas. A global conspiracy of sabotage and betrayal happened to my people and stripped us of our inheritance, our wealth, our land, our property, our technology. And to this very day, these people are still holding on to stolen goods, stolen property, and stolen land. We inherited, we wasn't born into this. Now it's up to us to figure out the truth. And then figure out, once you get the truth, you can formulate a strategy to move forward. Are you going to just let them keep the things they stole? Are you going to separate from them? Are you going to, try to get back what they stole from your ancestors and reestablish your identity, reestablish your nation? But first, you need to know exactly what happened. Otherwise, we're just out here, chickens with our heads chopped off, not knowing which direction to go. Not knowing what to do. But this Cynthia G is showing that she's really infatuated with the black man. The black man stays on her mind non-stop all day. Every show she makes is about the so-called black man. Even bringing Zaddy on, giving Zaddy a chance to discuss his plans for the black woman. She used that time to get this fool, this weak beta male white man, to discuss the black man. But yeah, that's about it though. I thought I was done. I had 3 prior videos about this Cynthia G. And I have another video because her name keep popping up, and I gotta be a person, one of the people to talk about it from a perspective of a so-called independent thinking black man.